continue the reading of Daulaire's Book of Greek Mythology with the wild and vulgar Centaurs. They did not honor any of the gods. They were half men and half horses, as cunning as wild men and as savage as untamed horses. They had inherited the worst dispositions of both. The first Centaurs had come tumbling out of a cloud that their father Ixion, king of the Lapith people, had married. Mistaking it for the goddess Hera. Zeus had created the cloud to test the ungodliness of the wicked king who wanted to carry off Hera. Ixion was severely punished for his ungodliness. He was condemned to whirl about forever in the underworld, tied to a flaming wheel, but his offspring, the Centaurs, remained on earth as a scourge to the Lapith people. The Centaurs lived without law and order, stormed over fields, trampled crops, and carried off the Lapith women, and they ate raw meat. The young Centaurs were no better than their elders. They were poorly brought up by parents who kicked them and spanked them and left them to fend for themselves. There was one Centaur who was kind and wise and was fond of children. His name was Chiron. Though he looked like the other Centaurs, he wasn't related to them at all. He was the son of Cronus the Titan, and was immortal. Chiron was famous as the greatest teacher in Greece. Kings brought their small sons to him, so he could raise them in the true spirit of heroes. In his quiet cave on Mount Pelion, he taught them many manly sports, and how to use the healing herbs of the earth, and how to read the stars in the sky. All his pupils returned to their homes, exceeding their fathers in courage and knowledge. One day Apollo brought to Chiron his little mortal son, Asclepius. His mother, a Lapith princess, had died, and Apollo asked Chiron to raise the boy. Asclepius grew up in Chiron's cave, raised with loving care, and being the son of Apollo, he soon surpassed his foster father in his knowledge of healing the sick. When he was grown, he left Chiron's cave and went down from the mountain to help the people of Greece. He became the first great physician. People flocked to him from far and near, and many who came on crutches went away skipping and dancing. His patients adored him and showered treasures upon him. And it wasn't long before they worshipped him as a god and built temples in his honor. Asclepius put beds in his temples, and they became the first hospitals. There he went about from bed to bed, pleased to be looked upon as a god, leaning on a staff entwined with sacred serpents. Serpents knew all the secrets of the earth, and often told him the causes and cures for diseases. Sometimes he put his patients to sleep with a magic draught, and listened to what they muttered in their dreams. Their words often revealed to him what caused their ailments, and he could then find a cure for them. Asclepius had a wife and 7 children, and all the children followed in their father's footsteps. His sons were his assistant physicians. His daughters were his nurses. Hygeia, one of his daughters, washed and scrubbed her patients from morning to night, and it was a marvel to see how fast they regained their health. Before Hygeia's time, it was thought that soap and water would kill the sick. Asclepius grew famous, rich, and pink-faced, and as time went on he grew so skilled in his art that he could even bring the dead back to life. The Fates became upset and complained to Zeus that they measured and clipped the threads of life in vain. Hades too was angry, for he was being cheated out of dead souls. Apollo pointed out to Zeus how much good his son was doing for mankind, and for a while Zeus was lenient. But when Asclepius accepted gold for bringing the dead back to life, Zeus hurled a thunderbolt at him. Nothing but a small heap of ashes was left of Asclepius, the first great doctor, but his temples and his teachings of medical science remained, and the gods put his image among the stars as a constellation. Apollo was furious with Zeus for killing his son and wanted revenge. He did not dare to raise his hand against his mighty father, but he slew the Cyclops, who had given Zeus the thunderbolt. Zeus, in his turn, had to revenge the Cyclops. He punished Apollo by making him serve for a year as a slave on earth. Apollo found a good master and suffered no hardship, but the gods on high Olympus missed him and his music, the Nine Muses most of all. The Nine Muses were daughters of Zeus and the Titaness Mnemosyne. Their mother's memory was as long as her beautiful hair, for she was the goddess of memory and knew all that had happened since the beginning of time. She gathered her 9 daughters around her and told them wondrous tales. She told them about the creation of earth and the fall of the Titans, about the glorious Olympians and their rise to power, about Prometheus, who stole the heavenly fire, about the sun and the stars, and most of all about the greatness and wisdom of their father Zeus. The 9 Muses listened to her with wide sparkling eyes, and turned her stories into poems and songs so that they would never be forgotten. Apollo, the god of music, trained them and taught them to sing harmoniously together. He led the choir of muses through the halls of Olympus and over the slopes of Mount Parnassus, and their music rang so pure and fine that even the songbirds fell silent to listen. Each of the muses had her own special art. Calliope, the muse of heroic poetry, was the first among them. She had a mortal son named Orpheus, and he sang almost as beautifully as the muses themselves. When he was grown, he left his mother and his 8 loving aunts, and went to live in his father's kingdom of Thrace, to bring the joy of music to earth. His voice rang so pure and true that the fiercest warriors put down their swords, and savage beasts lay spellbound at his feet. Trees pulled up their roots and moved closer to listen, and even hard rocks rolled up to him. Orpheus's music was joyful and gay, for he was in love with Eurydice. A sweet young maiden, and she loved him in return. On the day of their wedding, his song swelled out, filled with happiness, as his bride danced on light feet through the meadow. Suddenly she trod on a snake and sank to the ground, dead of its poisonous bite. Hermes gently closed her eyes and led her away to the underworld. No more songs came from Orpheus's throat. No more tunes rang out from his lyre. All joy had gone out of his life. He had to have his Eurydice back. Weeping and grieving, Orpheus wandered about, searching for an entrance to Hades, and when at the end of the world he found it, he did what no living man had ever done before. He went down to the realm of the dead to beg for the return of his beloved. His music had power to move hard rocks. It might also move the cold heart of Hades. Hope gave him back his songs, and playing and singing, he walked down the dark, steep path. His silvery voice floated down through the dark like a gentle summer breeze, and its magic moved the iron gates of Hades. They sprang open and let him in, and Cerberus, the 3-headed watchdog, lay down at his feet and let him pass. The whole dark underworld stilled and listened to Orpheus's music as he entered the realm of the dead, singing about his great love, begging to have his Eurydice back. The fluttering souls hushed. Those condemned to eternal pain stopped groaning, and their torturers, the avenging Furies, the Erinyes, dropped their whips and wept tears of blood. Hades, the pitiless king of the dead, sat on his black marble throne, with Queen Persephone at his side. Even he was so moved by the music that tears rolled down his sallow cheeks, and cold Persephone sobbed. Her heart was so touched that she turned to her husband and begged him to let Eurydice go back to the sunny world above. Hades gave his consent, but he made one condition. Orpheus must not look at his bride before they reached the realm of the living. She would walk behind him, but if he turned and looked at her, she must return to the underworld. Overcome with joy, Orpheus started up the dark path, and as his music faded into the distance, gloom again descended over the underworld. The way was long, and as Orpheus walked on and on, doubt began to creep into his mind. Had Hades deceived him? Were the sounds he heard behind him really Eurydice's footsteps? He had almost reached the upper world, and could already see a dim light ahead, when he could bear his doubts no longer. He had to turn and see if she really was there. He saw her sweet face, but only for an instant, for again Hermes appeared at her side. He turned her about and led her back to the dark gloom below. Faintly Orpheus heard her whisper farewell. He had lost her forever through his lack of faith. Orpheus never again found joy on earth. He wandered into the wilderness to grieve in solitude. He sang, but now his songs were so mournful that tears trickled down the cheeks of wild beasts, and the willows wept. A band of wild nymphs stormed through the woods, shouting to Orpheus to join them. They yelled and carried on so loudly that they could not hear his silvery voice and were not touched by its magic. They wanted him to dance with them, but he had no heart for their revelry, and in a fury they threw themselves over him. They tore him to pieces and tossed his body into a river. The river stopped its gurgling to listen, for the haunting voice of Orpheus still issued forth from his dead lips as he floated down to the open sea. The Muses grieved over him. They searched the sea till they found his body on the shores of the island of Lesbos. There they gave him a proper funeral, and at last he could rejoin his beloved Eurydice as a flitting ghost in the underworld. The Muses sang not only of the gods and of the spirits sprung from Mother Earth, but also of great kings and heroes, descended all from mighty Zeus. The tales of heroes and brave men still ring in our ears as we listen to the Muses sing. Next we will read about the mortal descendants of Zeus. This has been a reading from Daulaire's Book of Greek Mythology. You can purchase your own copy from Amazon.